South China Sea tensions. Could this be the next global flashpoint? The South China Sea has long been one of the world's most contested regions. China claims nearly the entire area through its 9-dash line, despite competing claims from nations like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. The waters are rich in resources, a crucial global trade route, and strategically vital for military control. For years, tensions have simmered between China and regional powers, as well as between China and the US, which conducts freedom of navigation operations to challenge Beijing's control. But what if these tensions boil over into war? Could a regional conflict drag the world into another global crisis? Stage 1. Military clashes between China and regional powers. Tensions in the South China Sea are already high, with near-daily confrontations between Chinese naval forces and vessels from countries like the Philippines and Vietnam. A military clash could begin in several ways. 1. Direct naval confrontation. China attacks or sinks a Philippine or Vietnamese vessel near contested islands like the Spratlys or Parasols. Manila or Hanoi retaliate, and an armed skirmish escalates into a full-scale naval battle. If the Philippines is involved, the US could be drawn in, as it has a mutual defense treaty with Manila. 2. Airspace incident turns deadly. A Chinese fighter jet collides with a US or allied aircraft, triggering a military response. If American pilots are killed, the US might strike Chinese bases in the region, escalating tensions further. 3. China declares an Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. Beijing imposes an ADIZ over the South China Sea, demanding that all foreign planes identify themselves. The US and allies refuse to comply, leading to potential dogfights in the air. At this stage, the conflict could remain a regional naval war, but if foreign powers get involved, the situation could quickly spiral out of control. Stage 2. US freedom of navigation operations and retaliation. The US has long opposed China's claims in the South China Sea, conducting regular freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, by sailing warships through contested waters. If fighting breaks out, the US has several response options. 1. Increased military presence. The US deploys aircraft carriers to the region, increasing pressure on China. Japan and Australia could send naval forces to support, escalating the conflict into a broader war. 2. Limited retaliatory strikes. If China attacks a US ally, Washington might launch precision airstrikes on Chinese military installations in the South China Sea. China could respond by targeting US bases in Japan, Guam, or even Hawaii. 3. Cyber and economic warfare begins. The US and allies impose crippling sanctions on China, cutting off trade and finance. China retaliates with cyber attacks on Western banks, power grids, and communication networks. The global economy starts to collapse as supply chains are disrupted, sending inflation skyrocketing worldwide. At this stage, the conflict is no longer just a South China Sea issue, it becomes a global economic and military crisis. Stage 3. Risk of regional conflict expanding globally. Once the US and China are engaged in direct military action, there is a high risk of other nations being drawn in. 1. Full-scale war in the Pacific. Japan, Australia, and possibly India join the fight against China. China blockades Taiwan to prevent outside interference, effectively starting another warfront. North Korea sees an opportunity and attacks South Korea, leading to a second conflict. 2. Russia joins the fight. Russia, China's strategic partner, provides military support, possibly attacking NATO forces in response to Western involvement. The conflict expands into Europe, with Russia taking advantage of the chaos to escalate tensions in Ukraine or the Baltics. 3. Nuclear threats and escalation. If China faces significant losses, Beijing might threaten nuclear retaliation. The US and its allies consider using tactical nuclear weapons to prevent further Chinese expansion. A single nuclear strike could trigger an all-out nuclear war, leading to global devastation. Possible outcomes. How could this end? 1. Limited war and ceasefire. After initial clashes, diplomacy prevails, and both sides agree to de-escalate. China's expansion is halted, but tensions remain high, with continued military buildups. 2. Prolonged conflict in Asia. A regional war drags on for years, devastating Southeast Asia's economy. Global trade suffers as the South China Sea, one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, becomes a war zone. countries are forced to choose sides, leading to a long and costly geopolitical struggle. 3. Global war and possible nuclear catastrophe. If China and the US refuse to back down, the war spreads beyond Asia, drawing in NATO and Russia. A nuclear exchange becomes a real possibility, threatening human civilization itself. Final thoughts. Can this be avoided? The South China Sea is a ticking time bomb. A small spark could ignite a conflict that drags in the world's superpowers. The key to avoiding war lies in diplomacy, strategic deterrence, and clear military red lines between China and the US. But with rising nationalism, territorial disputes, and military buildup, the question remains: is war inevitable, or can cooler heads prevail before it's too late?